Let me pose a question to you. Is Cave Johnson an innovator, a misunderstood genius, or simply a moron? While this question can be asked about Johnson as a person, the same can also be asked about his company, Aperture Science, and the products that they've invented. The Portal franchise exposes the player to a world filled with remarkable technologies that are both innovative and useful, like the long fall boots, panels, and the portal gun itself. At the same time, there's also equally as many, if not more, that are significantly less useful. Funny enough, these inefficient inventions generally revolve around technologies that enhance or change mobility, either for objects or people, such as the aerial faceplate, the excursion funnel, and the vacuum tubes. It's not that these inventions aren't innovative or impressive in their own right, it's just that they don't really offer any practical use. For example, if an aerial faceplate is sold to the public, and a group like the US Navy purchases some, what are they going to use it for? Launching a jet off of an aircraft carrier? The same could be said for excursion funnels. It's a really impressive technology, and while it could have some practical applications, you could easily use similar, more efficient systems like conveyor belts or even panels. Then there's the vacuum tubes, or tubes for short, an invention that is so uniquely Aperture Science that it's almost as prevalent as panels throughout the miles-long facility. I've talked about both the size of the facility and panels in previous videos, but the tubes have always been in the backdrop of these topics, and they're more interesting than you might have assumed.
Because is it not obvious what they're for? They're for doing things.
At a glance, they're not as creative as panels or as interesting as the facility's size, but they're essential to making the facility work in the first place. The primary duty of the tubes is to transport items like weighted storage cubes, turrets, Atlas and Peabody, trash, and even elevators throughout the testing tracks. These items are distributed all throughout the facility, whether it be to vital apparatus vents in the test chambers or the central AI chamber. Both in the original title and in Portal 2, pneumatic pressure is used to physically move the objects from point A to point B, and throughout the entire facility. This fact is known based on the existence and naming of the pneumatic diversity vent, a portion of the tube system that effectively acts as an endpoint for one part of the system, which either dispenses or sucks up objects to be put into the tube network. The specific concept of these tubes being able to suck up objects was meant to be a gameplay mechanic in Portal 2, and remained in the game relatively late into development. So much so that a demonstration video was showcased at E3 2010, showing how the player could use portals to take advantage of suction, to either remove portions of walls or dispose of obstacles like turrets. While this feature didn't make it into the retail version as a mechanic for the player to utilize, it's still present all throughout the game and in the tube system itself. The clearest example of this is when Chell and Wheatley get sucked into the tube system following the destruction of the neurotoxin generator. Besides objects and people, the elevators seen in test chambers seem to also share the same tube systems that transport objects and trash, or vice versa. Whether the elevators themselves are moved by pneumatic pressure is an excellent question, one that was addressed pretty well under a now deleted Reddit post. The user points out that the elevator moves slightly from side to side as it arrives to pick up Chell, after which it locks itself to the rail behind it. This theory ultimately hinges on the idea that the elevators do use a rail system, but only when transporting human beings. It's derived from the fact that you can see a part resembling a gear pushing out when the elevator arrives, and it never seems to depress even when the elevator is moving. While confirming that these details were true, I noticed that the specific animations for the elevator arriving and leaving show the gear moving. However, the animation set for turret carriage does not show the gear pushed out at all while the elevator moves, lending credence to this theory. At first I viewed this theory to be pretty convincing, and regardless of whether it's correct or not, it is well thought out. But I ultimately came to the conclusion that the elevator does not use the pneumatic system to move itself around the facility. The commenter suggests that when the elevator bounces when it arrives, it moves too much to be caused by some sort of internal suspension system, and would instead be caused by movement. At first, I considered minute details to run against this idea, but one scene comes to mind that acts as a definitive theory buster: the nanobot work crew. When Wheatley slows down the elevator, which in itself is already a strong sign of it being on a rail, it's clearly seen to be in the open, and not contained within any kind of tube or cylinder. This ultimately indicates that the elevators are attached to rails, and this was seemingly Valve's intention from the get-go. Developer commentary indicates that the idea of elevators, trash, and other items using the same system was an intentional choice to indicate importance to the player, but it's not stated that they use the vacuum to actually move. As stated by Valve developer Ido Megal,
with vacuum tubes such a big part of Portal 2, we designed the new elevators to work within them. We liked the idea that this made the player feel about as important to Aperture as the cargo moving through the tube, and it also gave us plenty of opportunities to show how the system could go wrong, such as when the tubes get blocked or when cargo rains down on the elevator.
In the files, there's a model simply called elevator.mdl, which is an unused elevator model not too dissimilar from the retail version, with the most important detail being 2 sets of gears or wheels on either side, obviously meant to fit to some kind of rail system. The elevators in old Aperture use a similar setup, where numerous track points can be seen that mount the elevator to the rail system, though, unlike the modern facility, these older elevator shafts appear to exist explicitly for that purpose, being elevator shafts. While many aspects of modern Aperture technology can trace their origins to old Aperture, the tubes are an exception to this idea. The vital apparatus vents, or cube droppers for simplicity, don't appear to be attached to any sort of pipe system. In testing Sphere 5, a cube dropper is attached to an extremely long appendage that goes all the way to the top of the sphere. However, this is the only instance, at least in the single-player campaign, of a cube dropper having an explicit source, for lack of a better term. In the sphere that immediately precedes it, the player can clearly see that the cube dropper isn't attached to anything above, and just seems to be there. The same situation can be seen in Sphere number 1, where the cube dropper has nothing above it, merely a panel blocking the player's view of the top. It's certainly arguable that this is merely just a development choice to cut down on unnecessary model and brush usage. But we can see that in nearly every single testing sphere that the gel pipes have points in which they come from the outside of the sphere. We never see the cubes in old Aperture anywhere else outside of the testing spheres, meaning that they likely use a more rudimentary system, like conveyor belts, or just have some enormous stockpile in each sphere. After all, the only things seen to be connecting the spheres to each other are the gel pipes and elevator shafts. The presence of gantries and exterior catwalks inside of each sphere would also indicate heavy human activity outside of the tracks themselves, either to observe test subjects or to access points like the cube storage. The most understandable and straightforward conclusion to come to is that the pneumatic transport system did not exist during Cave Johnson's reign. Compared to the modern facility, there is quite literally not a single pipe present in the older facility that transports anything other than gel. Not even the gel itself is moved by pneumatic pressure. When activating the gel pump stations, we can visibly see that the pumps which move the gel are centrifugal pumps. This is indicated by the presence of a large motor casing, alongside the circular pipe casing and an outflow point, where a gel flow label clearly indicates that the flow goes out of the pump. The Pneumatic Diversity Vent video from E3 2010 would also suggest that Aperture Science didn't even start using this system until 1998, judging by the patent copyright at the very beginning of the video. Consider that it is also a prohibitively expensive system to run. While the older facility within the salt mines is large in its own right, the modern facility spans miles at the bare minimum, and is crammed full of these vacuum tubes. Pushing that much air through a facility this large constantly for years would require an immense amount of energy, which begs the question of how powerful the Aperture Science reactor is, but that's for another video. The point I'm trying to make is that this system is inefficient and wasteful. Clearly, with the amount of constant pressure and speed provided by the system, it doesn't need to have corkscrews, large bendy segments, and portions that overall just don't make much sense. This speaks to the overall nature and idea that the vacuum tubes represent. It's inarguably a really cool and impressive system, and perhaps it is useful in some scenarios. But overall, it's a wasteful system that represents the ideals that Aperture Science follows. That's not even me saying that. Valve developer Jeremy Bennett states this in the developer commentary for Portal 2, saying,
"Vacuum pipes cropped up occasionally in the original Portal. This time we wanted to show that this was the main way that Aperture transported all of its supplies about the facility. It felt very true to Aperture that it seemed like an inefficient and ridiculously expensive solution to their transport problems. We also wanted it to feel more violent and physical than before, with objects constantly ricocheting against the sides of the pipes. It was as if Aperture had no real control over the system, and no real care for the things they were transporting."
At the start of this video, I asked whether you thought Cave Johnson was an innovator, a misunderstood genius, or a moron. Personally, I view him to be a combination of all three. I don't see Johnson as a moron, but I don't see him as a genius, though I do see him as an innovator. Old Aperture represents an era where the company sought to reach ever higher into the sky to innovate new and exciting things, like the dual handheld portal device. New Aperture would act as a continuation of these ideals, but would strive to create more and more unmarketable technologies in a tireless pursuit to continue testing. Both of these eras in Aperture Science history are uniquely distinct, but also showcase an important aspect of culture in the facility. Compared to their rival, Black Mesa, Aperture is unabashedly relentless in the pursuit of doing science for the sake of doing science, of inventing things that may not serve any real practical purpose, but are nonetheless innovative in their own right, like the tube system. To further this example, Aperture Science didn't use trains or forklifts to move things like their rival. They used tubes. They didn't build a sprawling science facility with access to sunlight. They went miles underground in an abandoned salt mine. Hell, they manufactured high-tech shower curtains, for God's sake. Yet, why? Why would Aperture Science spend all the time, money, and resources to perform seemingly pointless testing to reach nondescript, functionless goals? The answer is simpler than you might think. And that's because it's been in front of us all along. Like their motto states, we do what we must because we can. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed spending more time than really necessary to talk about tubes, pipes, and cylinders. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and follow me on both Blue Sky and Twitter to keep up to date with all of my projects. Is Blue Sky and Twitter not your thing? Just care to keep up to date with video uploads only? Then consider subscribing. Until next time, take care of yourself and get yourself a Crunchwrap Supreme. That'll make sense by the end of the month.